Welcome to Presidential Fight Club, the show that answers the question, if all 44 presidents fought each other one-on-one, who would win? Hosted by two history professors who have too much time on their hands, Scott Rank and James Early. Welcome to the final fight of round one of the Western Regional. In the last fight, Grant was victorious over Clinton. Now we're going to get into two modern presidents, Lyndon B. Johnson versus Herbert Hoover, hailing from my home state of Iowa. First, let's get into the enigma that is LBJ. James, what does LBJ bring to the fight?
Well, LBJ grew up in a small town central to western Texas, and I don't want to say West Texas because West Texas is really more like El Paso, Fort Stockton, way out there. Like I live in Houston, and that's still like 800 miles away. It's like I could get faster to Florida probably. But so he grew up very poor, but he had an absolutely incredible ambition and incredible self-confidence, bordering on megalomania even from a young age. And it's funny because that ambition was something that he had from a very early age. A lot of our presidents have kind of played this game where they say, well, I don't really want to be president, but if the people demand it, the people have called me to this office, or in some cases, God is wanting me to do this. LBJ just said, no, I want to be president. I want to be president really bad. And he carried that with him his whole life. He doesn't seem to have been really active in sports necessarily, although if you grow up poor in I'll just say central Texas, and you're going to be talking with your fists a lot. So he had to have done at least some fist fighting. I haven't read a lot about LBJ's really early life, but he was a very large fella. He was, in fact, our second tallest president after Abraham Lincoln. He was about 6'3", 200 pounds, so not terribly thin, but not fat either. And he went into the military when World War II broke out, and he was in the Navy. Started out as kind of a desk job, but then he actually asked for and got a combat assignment, and he served in a little bit of combat. I think it was aerial combat, if I remember correctly. So I don't know how much hand-to-hand combat training he would have had. He would have had some because they all had to have some for survival training. So Johnson is huge, and he may not have been particularly trained and skilled hand-to-hand fighter, but what he lacks in fighting, he makes up for in self-confidence. And I'll just say one thing about when he was president later, and I know he did this earlier in life too. He would do this thing called the LBJ treatment. And when he wanted somebody to do what he wanted, in other words, if he wanted a bill passed, and he would bring some senator into the White House, and the senator would say, well, I don't think I'm going to vote for that. He would get inches. He would practically get nose to nose. He would put his face right in the other person's face, and he would look down on him because he was taller than almost everybody, being 6'3", and he was a big guy, and he just basically threatened them with his very presence, and he would yell at them, and he would scream at them if need be. He would curse at them. He would shake his hands and sometimes grab them by the shoulders and shake them, or grab them by the lapels. And so typically people said, okay, I'll do what you want. When you got a 6'3" man, 200 pounds shaking you and yelling at you and, doing all that stuff, you're going to do what he says. So maybe he will get in his opponent's face and pretty much just say, I'm going to win this fight. You're going to surrender. And they'll go, yes, sir. So that's what he brings to the table. An interesting combination of skills.
Definitely. The Johnson treatment is famous, and a book by Robert Caro, who's writing a multi-volume biography. It's probably the most extensively researched biography on any president. It's been published over a series of decades, and he digs deep into Johnson's use of psychological torture on people. And because of that, he's probably one of the most effective Senate leaders we've ever had. And that plays in directly to Herbert Hoover. Hoover is the opposite. Hoover is an Iowan, like myself, the only president from Iowa, which is sad because we get the Great Depression president. Fair or not, if he was actually responsible for it, he still gets the blame for it. Hoover is in a lot of ways a typical Iowan. Now, in terms of physicality, he's not remarkable. He's 5'11". He had a fleshy face, a ruddy complexion, and a husky build. So not a small guy, but not really powerful. Described as round-shouldered. He wore a beard and mustache when he was younger to look older. Now, the Iowan thing comes out in terms of his personality, and this is not going to be a good matchup to LBJ. He's described as hardworking, incorruptible, self-assured, and self-reliant. Okay, good starter. Kind of like a nice Iowa hardworking farmer getting the harvest in on time. But then he's also described as aloof, shy, wary of crowds, awkward at superficial social relations, and extremely sensitive to criticism. So LBJ, who is the absolute master of tearing someone down psychologically, bullying them, intimidating them, promising favors, and threatening punishment if they do not comply, Hoover is particularly vulnerable to this. One biographer, David Brenner, said, "It was perhaps the private man's shrinkage from rough political contact, the predilection for working by himself, and the habit of perceiving problems as requiring rational and personal solutions that made Hoover uncomfortable with the rude, demanding Congress, as well as with the press." So for someone who shrinks away from confrontation, this is one of the weakest matchups we could possibly have. So he was a highly efficient person, but he concentrated on detail rather than the broader significance of a problem. So again, this could be some of the blame that is hurled at him for the Depression. Now, one positive thing I will say about Hoover, I'm kind of grasping at straws here, but when he was a young adult, he would play a game with his friends where they would hurl a 10-pound ball at one another. And if the person throwing it missed, then the intended target would pick it up and try to throw it back. One friend said that it was more strenuous than boxing and other contact sports. So if you can imagine one of the opening scenes of Braveheart, where William Wallace is playing a similar game against a very large Scotsman, where they're throwing a large rock at each other, and the rock lands close to William Wallace, it misses, he throws it back at the guy and beans him on the head and nearly passes out. This is something that Hoover did do, so he could have some resilience in the face of a large, blunt object coming at him, such as a Lyndon B. Johnson, let us say, a hypothetical 6'4" Texas object coming at him. But when it opens its mouth and starts talking, that's when he could be shut down. So this is a match that I think leaves Hoover particularly vulnerable, although he is from Iowa and has that incredible Iowan ethos that could perhaps pull him through the day. But does the Iowan ethos save him, James?
No.
Okay.
I'm afraid not.
Thinking about that one for a while.
Johnson, he may have strong arms from tossing around those heavy balls, but Johnson goes right for him, goes for the jugular, grabs him around the throat, shakes him, punches him with a 1-2, and Hoover's on the ground before he even knew what hit him. So I'm afraid it's a landslide victory for LBJ.
Okay, he got the Johnson treatment.
Yep.
We'll see if others get the Johnson treatment. All right, well, that was round one. Round two is going to be interesting because a lot of presidents were seeded into the second round. They're perceived as heavyweights, and I think that's pretty fair. So in round two, the first fight is going to be Dwight Eisenhower versus George W. Bush. Thanks for listening to Presidential Fight Club. If you'd like to download your own printable bracket sheets for each regional tournament so you can guess how the tournament will go, check out presidentialfightclub.com. We'd appreciate it if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts as well. Thanks for listening, and may you fight with the stamina of Teddy Roosevelt, the courage of George Washington, and the reach of Abraham Lincoln.